And yeah, the biggest story in the hockey world, there's no great way to transition off of talking about a male grooming product to the passing of to someone's death. But the biggest story last night, Monday night at just about 11 p.m. Eastern on the dot, the word came down that the owner of the Ottawa Senators, Eugene Melnyk, had passed away at the age of 62 due to an undisclosed illness. Now, I mean, obviously, the best way I could think to sum it up on Twitter was this. It is incredibly unfortunate to hear of his passing, but the first thing that comes to mind is immediately his complicated legacy. Now, I will say, on this show today, talking about, what's the future of the Sens? Will they be good now? I think that's crossing a line. Trying to question, what might it have been that caused his death? That's crossing a line. But at the same time, while we are going to talk about the positives from Eugene Melnyk's life and his time as the owner of the Ottawa Senators, it wouldn't be doing his legacy justice in terms of not talking about the negative. Because, Endo, 24 hours ago, if I asked you about Eugene Melnyk, there's a real good chance your answer wouldn't have been all that positive. It would have just been like, it's kind of a bad owner, or this story, that story. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, he died, so we can't talk about that. I don't believe in that. And I'm not comparing him to this person and what this person did, but it's the same idea of, say, someone like Chris Brown. When he passes away, are we just never going to talk about the Rihanna stuff again? No, that's a part of his legacy. It is. It flat out is. And that will be a part of the conversation. I don't think you can talk about Eugene Melnyk and his life without mentioning some of the negative.
Yeah, I completely agree. They do say not to speak ill on the dead. Typically right now it's a grieving period as well, but you have to take into account both sides of everything. You can criticize someone's actions and not be discriminatory. You can say that he has done good things and he has done bad things. This applies to everybody. Everyone's has good stuff, and everyone has their own demons that they're either fighting or they've had done. I feel like it is still fair to criticize someone, but as long as it is constructive. I'm very, very open to the idea of being constructive criticism. You could say Eugene Melnyk was very stingy in certain operations, not willing to pay players, but you could say he did have a heart of gold and he did whatever he could for that organization during his time of being here. Like, everyone has their own ideals and views, right? So that's the way I roll.
And that's why first, I wanted to talk about the positives, because his legacy isn't entirely negative. You look at a lot of billionaires in this world, and I don't know how many of them do give back to the extent that Eugene Melnyk did. He is the reason why the Ottawa Senators still exist. That is just a fact. There is a very, very good chance that had he not bought the team in the summer of 2003, that they would have been moved, because that team was facing bankruptcy. And very much could have ended up being moved. I do know of at least one guy, it's mentioned on Wikipedia, but in terms of, who could have bought the team, who could have purchased the team, they easily could have been moved had it not been Eugene Melnyk, and he was the one to keep them there. And in his time as the owner of this team, they went to the 2007 Stanley Cup Final. They, had some up and down periods of being competitive. Obviously, it wasn't all that long ago. I mean, 5 years ago now, but still, they went to the Eastern Conference Final, almost made their way to the final over Pittsburgh, and who knows what would have happened there. And honestly, when I think of the Sens and when I think of, Eugene Melnyk, you can literally look. I mean, the stories are out there about his philanthropic endeavors. I mean, literally, there's a section of his Wikipedia page that mentions a lot, and rightfully so. Just one of them donated $1 million to the Belmont Child Care Association for the construction of a child care center at Belmont Park called Anna House. Just that idea of giving back, and he was a director of a humanitarian organization that helped children in orphanages, for God's sakes. And then I think of something that was a little bit more publicized, and just how kind the Senators organization was to Jonathan Petra and his family, because that story was very much out there before his extremely unfortunate passing, I think 4 years ago now. Like, when I think of the positives, that's what I think of. I don't think anybody can attempt to take away from the fact that Eugene Melnyk was a very charitable person who did give back. I think trying to downplay that would make you look rather foolish. You know, the positive sides to him are certainly out there and well established.
Yeah, like you see the work that he's done. Not only is just being the owner of the Ottawa Senators, but the philanthropy and stuff he's doing to give back. That's something that, like you said before, not a lot of people in that like monetary bracket do that kind of stuff, or if they do, not to the same extent that he has. I mean, 62 is a very young age for the pass at, and considering what he's stuffed and he's done already in his 62 years, imagine what he could have done even more. And like, this team was also on the up and up as well too, because how many prospects they had coming through, contracts being signed. It's rather unfortunate, and for better or for worse of his actions, he will always have a space. He will always have a space in not only just the Ottawa Senators, but just the NHL in general.
And there's been a lot of players, current and former, coming out and telling stories. I mean, Pierre Dorian spoke about him earlier today. Brady Tkachuk spoke about him. Even Erik Karlsson mentioning that while he and Eugene never had a conversation after he was traded to San Jose, that Melnyk still sent he and his wife flowers after their kids were born. So, I mean, it's the little things like that. Like, again, there is the negative side, and we'll touch up on that here in a moment. But, I agree with the statement that in the majority of times, it's not just a black or white situation. You can't necessarily paint people with broad strokes. That said, and it's an entirely different conversation, can people do certain things that maybe just kind of like push you towards filing someone in that situation? Sure. And there might be Sens fans to be like, well, look at the negative. And, prior to his passing, that's a conversation that I think a lot of people would have heard of. Like, yes, he's done this, this, and this, but there's also that. It's the duality of man, I do suppose. But there is a lot of positive to go off when it comes to Eugene Melnyk's legacy. And then you get to the flip side. This is a man that had a very contentious relationship in the last couple years with the city of Ottawa, with Senators fans directly, with the media. I don't know how many NHL owners. I think the quote was from around 2009. A reporter asked him about rebuilding the team, and the quote was something along the lines of, anyone who thinks that I should rebuild this team should blow themselves up. Pretty sure that was the quote that was out there around 2009, and you could sit there and say, well, hey, how serious was he? But at the same time, you are the owner of a professional sports franchise, probably crossing the line on that. He would often call out reporters. I think Ian Mendes was often at the brunt of his aggressions towards the media, especially around 2015 and onward, where there were so many calls for sell the team, sell the team, sell the team. So many moments of him essentially threatening to move the team. And a lot of Sens fans feeling hard-pressed by the fact that this was a man that was in need for a liver transplant, and a Sens fan stepped up in 2015 and helped him get this liver transplant.
Right.
And still in the following years, well, I might move the team. Like, how many moments were there on Hockey Night in Canada? There was the Heritage game, right? The outdoor game where he essentially was like, oh, we might move the team. Like, it was very, very contentious for Sens fans, which I think leads to, I mean, God, dude, there was crowdfunding for billboards to be put up by Sens fans to try and get him to sell the team. There was that super weird video with like, here's Mark Borowiecki, and we're trying to win sense. Like, contentious is the only word that comes to mind. And like I said, I don't think that stuff can necessarily, you could argue too soon to talk about it, but that was Eugene Melnyk. It's the same thing of like, I don't think you can just talk about the positives. I think you'd be making a mistake if you, if you weren't to mention any of the positives, because there certainly were positives. But at the same side of the coin, you're not doing the man's legacy justice. I mean, you presume he was okay with his legacy being what it was because he lived the life that he did, and he led the Senators as the owner of that franchise in the way that he did. So it's shocking. It's incredibly sad. And he does leave behind, I've used the word a lot and I'll use it again, he does leave behind a very interesting, a very complicated legacy. But I think off of how he owned the Sens, he ran that team with the intent of making an impact on the hockey world. And in his passing, for better or worse, depending on the conversation, he did that.
Yeah. This really makes you think about all the memes that I remember Utree made a video about like the we're a team video and how that team had to like rebuild and do all that stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And like you see the actions that he's done there, but again, we go back to his humanitarian aspects, and like, does that really take away from what he's done? He may not have been like the greatest owner in the world, but he's, at the end of the day, he's still human. And I think one of the things as well that people need to understand is these people that you belittle on social media and everything, they're still people at the end of the day. And they have feelings, they have all this stuff. I'm not saying to like soften up, be just coddle everybody, but I'm saying like think twice before you say something bad about someone, because you never know what they're going to go through or what they have going on by themselves. I'm fair to basically critique him on his actions for how he ran the organization, but for him as a person with his morals and everything, I think it's out of line a little bit.
Yeah, like I said, I can understand some people having that mindset of like, okay, is it the right time to talk about it? But you talk about the man's life, and you got to look at all aspects of it. And I think you're right. Like, it's one of those things now that we're all kind of out of the moment of focusing on bad sports owner. And you start to think like, okay, well, he did save the team. Mm-hmm. He did do so much within within Ottawa, even the province of Ontario in general. Like he did a lot. And I'll sum it up because, it's such a tough situation to sit here and essentially have to eulogize somebody that, was such a prominent figure within hockey. But he leaves a legacy is the best way to put it. And it's sad. It's very, very sad to hear of his passing. I don't think, barring a few crazies out there, I don't think any Sens fan would have been like, okay, yeah, I want to change in ownership. I didn't want the man to have to pass away to get a potential change in direction. Right. So, obviously it's customary, it's standard, but genuinely, like, to, his family, his friends, anybody impacted by this. And that's the thing. There's a lot of people that were impacted in a positive way because Eugene Melnyk had the platform that he did and accomplished what he did in his life. So we'll leave it at that.